The weight of history does not rest evenly on everyone's shoulders. Some carry it like a burden, while others wear like armor. For Black people in America and beyond, the fight against racism has never been just about survival. It has been about dignity, justice, and the right to exist without fear. But in the face of oppression, some have refused to back down. They stood up, fought back, and won. This is their story. It was 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama. The air was thick with tension, but for a tired seamstress named Rosa Parks, it was just another day. She boarded the city bus, paid her fare, and sat in the section designated for Black passengers. But as more white passengers filled the bus, the driver ordered her to move. Rosa refused. That single act of defiance ignited the Montgomery bus boycott, a movement that shook the foundation of segregation in America. She was arrested, but her courage sparked a revolution, proving that one person's stand could inspire thousands. But Rosa Parks was not the first to resist. A decade earlier, in 1944, a 15-year-old girl named Irene Morgan was traveling from Virginia to Maryland. She was ordered to give up her seat to a white passenger. She refused, and when the police tried to drag her off the bus, she fought back. She was arrested, fined, and convicted, but she did not accept defeat. She took her case to the Supreme Court and won. The ruling declared that segregated interstate travel was unconstitutional, a legal victory that paved the way for future civil rights battles. The fight against racism was not just about refusing to move seats. It was about fighting systems built to keep Black people in their place. And one man understood that better than most: Charles Hamilton Houston. A brilliant lawyer and mentor to Thurgood Marshall, he dedicated his life to dismantling Jim Crow laws. He strategically challenged segregation in schools, laying the groundwork for the landmark Brown versus Board of Education case that ended legal segregation in public schools. He did not march in the streets, but his victories in the courtroom changed the course of history. Even as legal victories were won, the struggle continued. Across the country, Black people still faced violence, discrimination, and systemic barriers designed to keep them from progressing. But history has shown that oppression breeds resistance, and some individuals refuse to let racism dictate their futures. One such person was Robert F. Williams, a civil rights leader who believed that Black people had the right to defend themselves. Unlike many others in the movement who preached nonviolence, Williams advocated armed self-defense. In the 1950s, as the president of the NAACP chapter in Monroe, North Carolina, he trained Black men to protect their communities from white supremacist attacks. When the Ku Klux Klan rode through Black neighborhoods, Williams and his group fired back, forcing them to retreat. His philosophy of self-defense was controversial, but it challenged the idea that Black people had to suffer in silence. While Williams fought with weapons, others fought with their voices. James Baldwin, a writer and activist, used his words to expose the brutal realities of racism in America. His books and speeches forced the nation to confront its hypocrisy, making it impossible to ignore the injustice Black people face daily. Baldwin's fearless storytelling was its own form of resistance, proving that the pen could be just as powerful as any protest. Resistance took many forms. Some fought in courtrooms, others on the streets, and some used their creativity to break racial barriers. Take Dorothy Dandridge, the first Black woman to be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress. In an industry that marginalized Black talent, her success was a direct challenge to Hollywood's racist structures. She refused to accept roles that portrayed Black people as inferior, forcing the entertainment industry to acknowledge Black excellence. Then there was Jackie Robinson, who shattered the color barrier in Major League Baseball. He endured racial slurs, death threats, and constant discrimination, but he refused to break. By excelling in a sport that had excluded Black athletes for decades, Robinson's achievements went beyond baseball. He became a symbol of Black resilience and determination, showing that talent and hard work could not be denied, no matter how deeply racism was ingrained in society. The battle against racism was being fought in every arena: on buses, in courts, in neighborhoods, in books, in films, and even on baseball fields. Each act of defiance, no matter how big or small, contributed to a larger movement. The people who stood up against racism did not always know if they would succeed. Many faced violence, imprisonment, and even death. But they understood that the fight was bigger than themselves. They were fighting for future generations. Even in the darkest moments, they refused to be silent. They refused to be afraid. They refused to be defeated. And because of their courage, the world changed. The battle against racism was never just about laws or policies. It was about power, the power to control, to exclude, to silence. But throughout history, Black people have fought back, refusing to let oppression dictate their fate. Some fought with legal arguments, some with protests, and others with sheer defiance. And in every case, their resistance reshaped history. In 1960, 4 Black college students in Greensboro, North Carolina, walked into a Woolworth's lunch counter and sat down. The sign clearly said, "Whites only." The employees ignored them. The customers glared. But the young men did not move. They sat in silence, waiting to be served. When they were asked to leave, they refused. Day after day, more students joined them, occupying the lunch counter in peaceful protest. The movement spread across the country, forcing America to confront its segregationist policies. These young men had no weapons, no political power, and no protection. But their courage sparked the sit-in movement, a wave of resistance that helped dismantle Jim Crow laws. While the Greensboro sit-ins were making headlines, another battle was being fought in the Deep South. In 1961, a group of Black and white activists known as the Freedom Riders boarded buses and traveled through the South to challenge segregation. They knew the risks. They knew they would be beaten, arrested, possibly even killed. And yet, they went anyway. When they arrived in Alabama, a mob attacked them, setting one of the buses on fire. The riders barely escaped with their lives. But they did not back down. They continued their journey, forcing the federal government to enforce desegregation laws in public transportation. For many Black Americans, simply trying to exercise their right to vote was met with brutal resistance. In Mississippi, a fearless woman named Fannie Lou Hamer took on the system that sought to silence Black voters. Born into poverty, she understood the power of the ballot box. When she tried to register to vote, she was beaten, jailed, and threatened. But she refused to be intimidated. She traveled across the country, speaking about voter suppression, exposing the violence Black people faced at the polls. Her testimony at the 1964 Democratic National Convention shook the nation, forcing Americans to see the ugly truth of racial discrimination. As the civil rights movement gained momentum, some realized that laws alone were not enough to break the chains of racism. Economic power was just as crucial. In 1966, a young activist named Huey Newton co-founded the Black Panther Party in Oakland, California. The group was formed not just to challenge police brutality, but to empower Black communities through education, healthcare, and self-defense. The Black Panthers patrolled neighborhoods, fed hungry children, and provided free medical care. Their presence terrified the establishment, leading to FBI surveillance and crackdowns. But their impact could not be erased. They proved that Black resistance was not just about surviving, it was about thriving. While some fought through activism, others challenged racism in the world of sports. Muhammad Ali was not just a champion in the boxing ring. He was a champion for justice. When he refused to be drafted into the Vietnam War, stating that he would not fight for a country that denied Black people basic rights, he was stripped of his heavyweight title. He was banned from boxing, but he stood by his beliefs. Years later, he won his case in the Supreme Court and reclaimed his title, proving that principles mattered more than trophies. Ali was not alone in using sports as a platform for resistance. At the 1968 Olympics, 2 Black athletes, Tommie Smith and John Carlos, stood on the medal podium, raising their fists in a Black Power salute. It was a moment of silent defiance, a statement against racial injustice. The backlash was swift. They were expelled from the Olympics, their careers ruined. But their message resonated for generations, reminding the world that sports could be a stage for social change. Black resistance was not just about fighting injustice. It was about rewriting the narrative. In literature, music, and art, Black creators challenged stereotypes and reclaimed their stories. Maya Angelou's poetry spoke of pain and perseverance, of struggle and triumph. James Brown's anthem, "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud," became a rallying cry for self-empowerment. Nina Simone's haunting songs captured the frustration and hope of a people demanding change. Even in Hollywood, where Black actors were often relegated to minor roles, Sidney Poitier shattered barriers. He became the first Black actor to win an Academy Award for Best Actor, proving that talent could not be ignored. His roles challenged racial stereotypes, showing the world a different image of Black excellence. The fight against racism was not won in a single moment. It was a series of battles fought by people who refused to be broken. Each act of defiance, each voice raised in protest, each victory, big or small, paved the way for a better future. And still, the fight continues. The struggle against racism has never been confined to a single battlefield. It has been fought in courts, on the streets, in schools, in workplaces, and even in the quiet defiance of everyday life. It is a war waged not just by activists, but by ordinary men and women who refuse to be treated as less than human. For every law that upheld segregation, there was someone brave enough to break it. For every injustice, there was someone bold enough to challenge it. In 1957, 9 Black students, known as the Little Rock Nine, made history simply by walking into school. Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas, had been ordered to desegregate, but white mobs stood outside the gates, shouting threats, refusing to let them in. The governor even sent the National Guard to block their entrance. These teenagers, some as young as 14, arrived dressed in their best clothes, determined to claim their right to an equal education. Day after day, they endured spit, slurs, and violence from their white classmates. But they did not give up. With the support of federal troops, they eventually walked through those school doors, proving that education was a battlefield worth fighting for. In 1965, another battle unfolded in Selma, Alabama. Black citizens were being denied their right to vote through literacy tests, poll taxes, and sheer intimidation. So they decided to march. Led by John Lewis and Hosea Williams, hundreds of peaceful protesters walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, demanding justice. What they met on the other side was a wall of state troopers armed with clubs and tear gas. The brutal attack, later known as Bloody Sunday, was broadcast on national television, shocking the nation. But the marchers did not stop. 2 weeks later, thousands of supporters joined them, and together, they marched from Selma to Montgomery. Their courage forced the passage of the Voting Rights Act, proving that even in the face of violence, justice could prevail. While the civil rights movement focused on legal equality, another battle was brewing in the workforce. Black men and women were often denied fair wages, safe working conditions, and leadership positions. In the 1960s, a Memphis sanitation workers' strike became a defining moment in the fight for labor rights. Black sanitation workers were forced to work long hours in dangerous conditions, paid far less than their white counterparts. When 2 workers were crushed to death by faulty equipment, their colleagues had enough. They went on strike, holding signs that read, "I am a man," demanding dignity and fair pay. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. came to support them, delivering his final speech, "I've been to the mountaintop," the night before his assassination. Their victory was bittersweet, but it sent a powerful message. Black labor was valuable, and it deserved respect. The fight was not just about equality. It was about identity. Black people had long been told they were not beautiful, not intelligent, not capable of greatness. So they created their own movements to reclaim their power. The Black is Beautiful movement of the 1960s encouraged self-love and pride in African heritage. Natural hair became a symbol of defiance against Eurocentric beauty standards. Black-owned businesses flourished, proving that economic empowerment was just as revolutionary as political change. One of the most remarkable fights against racism was waged by Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman elected to Congress in 1968. She was told she would never win. She was told to stay silent. But she refused. She spoke up for the poor, for women, for the oppressed. In 1972, she ran for president, challenging a system that had never made room for people like her. She did not win, but she shattered barriers, paving the way for future generations of Black leaders. Even in the world of technology, Black excellence has been a form of resistance. In the 1960s, NASA's hidden figures, black female mathematicians like Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, and Mary Jackson, helped launch America into space. Their contributions were ignored for decades, but without them, the U.S. would not have won the space race. Their story, once buried by history, is now celebrated as proof that brilliance knows no color. From the streets of Montgomery to the halls of Congress, from lunch counters to Olympic podiums, the fight against racism has taken many forms. It is a fight that continues today, and it is a fight that will be won. Racism is not just about individual prejudice. It is about systems designed to maintain inequality. Some of the most powerful victories in history have come from challenging these systems head-on. Whether in education, the workplace, entertainment, or even sports, black individuals have continuously defied expectations and reshaped society. One such story is that of Claudette Colvin, a 15-year-old girl from Montgomery, Alabama. 9 months before Rosa Parks became the face of the bus boycott, Claudette refused to give up her seat to a white passenger. She was dragged off the bus, arrested, and ridiculed. Many civil rights leaders considered her case too controversial to champion. She was young, dark-skinned, and from a poor background. But she did not let rejection stop her. She testified in Browder v. Gale, the case that led to the Supreme Court ruling that segregated buses were unconstitutional. Though she was overlooked in history books, her courage was instrumental in dismantling bus segregation. Decades later, another young black woman stood up to racism, this time in the world of sports. In 1996, at just 16 years old, Dominique Dawes became the first black woman to win an Olympic gold medal in gymnastics. The sport had long been dominated by white athletes, but she refused to believe she did not belong. She trained relentlessly, broke barriers, and paved the way for future stars like Simone Biles. Her triumph was more than just a win for gymnastics. It was a win for representation, proving that black excellence could thrive in every field. While some fought on the global stage, others battled in their own communities. In 1966, the Black Panther Party was formed to protect black neighborhoods from police brutality. They patrolled the streets, ensuring that officers did not abuse their power. But their fight was not just about self-defense. They launched free breakfast programs for children, health clinics, and educational initiatives. The government labeled them a threat, fearing their growing influence. But the Panthers were not deterred. They proved that black communities could organize, uplift each other, and build systems of support even in the face of oppression. Education has always been one of the most powerful weapons against racism. In 2012, Malala Yousafzai was shot by the Taliban for fighting for girls' education. Across the Atlantic, a similar battle was happening in the United States, where black students were still facing discrimination in schools. In 2016, a group of black Harvard students launched the I, Too, Am Harvard campaign, using social media to highlight the microaggressions they faced on campus. Their voices sparked a national conversation, forcing universities to acknowledge and address institutional racism. The fight for justice is not limited to the past. In 2020, the world watched as millions took to the streets to protest the murder of George Floyd. The Black Lives Matter movement, which began in 2013, reached a turning point. People from all walks of life, across the globe, stood together, demanding change. Statues of slave traders were torn down. Companies were forced to confront their racist policies. Laws were challenged. It was a reminder that the fight against racism is ongoing, and that every act of resistance, big or small, matters. The stories of those who fought back remind us that history is not just something that happens. It is something we shape. Whether it is a young girl on a bus, an athlete on a podium, a student in a classroom, or a protester in the streets, every action taken against racism adds to the movement for justice. And as long as there is injustice, there will always be those willing to fight. The struggle against racism has never been just about laws or policies. It is about the resilience of people who refuse to be broken. Every act of defiance, every voice raised in protest, and every refusal to accept injustice has contributed to the fight for equality. As history moves forward, new challenges arise, but so do new warriors who are ready to take a stand. One of the most powerful examples of this ongoing resistance is the story of Colin Kaepernick. In 2016, the NFL quarterback made a decision that would change his career forever. He took a knee during the national anthem to protest police brutality against Black Americans. His silent protest sparked a nationwide debate. He was called unpatriotic, lost his position in the NFL, and was blacklisted from the league. But he never backed down. He used his platform to amplify voices fighting against injustice, funding social justice initiatives, and inspiring athletes across the world to use their influence for change. Today, his act of protest remains one of the most powerful symbols of resistance in modern America. At the same time, everyday people continue to fight battles in their communities. In Flint, Michigan, a predominantly Black city, residents discovered that their water was poisoned with lead. For years, their complaints were ignored by government officials. But Black activists, led by grassroots leaders, refused to accept silence. They exposed the truth, fought in court, and eventually forced the government to take action. Their fight was a reminder that racism is not just about individual acts of hate. It is about entire systems that must be dismantled. Across the country, Black entrepreneurs are also fighting back, this time by building economic power. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, the legacy of Black Wall Street, a thriving Black business district destroyed by white mobs in 1921, is being revived. Young Black business owners are reclaiming space, creating wealth, and ensuring that economic independence remains part of the fight for racial justice. The battle for equality has also extended to the entertainment industry. Hollywood, long criticized for its lack of diversity, has seen a shift led by Black creatives who refuse to be silenced. Filmmakers like Ava DuVernay, Jordan Peele, and Ryan Coogler are using their platforms to tell Black stories from a position of power. Movies like Black Panther and Selma have shattered records, proving that Black-led narratives are not just necessary. They are profitable. Representation matters, and these creators are ensuring that the next generation grows up seeing themselves as heroes, leaders, and history makers. Education remains one of the most powerful tools against racism. Schools, once sites of segregation and exclusion, are now battlegrounds for change. Black educators, historians, and activists are rewriting the narratives that have long erased or downplayed Black contributions. The fight to include accurate Black history in school curriculums continues, and despite pushback, progress is being made. The fight against racism is not just an American issue, it is global. In the UK, the Windrush scandal exposed how Black British citizens were wrongfully detained and deported. In France, protests erupted against police brutality targeting Black communities. Across Africa, movements against neocolonialism and economic exploitation continue to grow. From Brazil to South Africa to Australia, Black people and their allies are standing up, demanding justice, and reshaping their futures. As this chapter of history unfolds, one truth remains clear. Racism has never been defeated by silence. It is fought through action, through courage, and through the unwavering belief that justice is worth fighting for. To those who came before us, who stood against injustice despite the odds, we owe gratitude. To those who continue the fight today, we owe support. And to the future generations, we owe a better world. The question now is, how will you stand in this fight?